Hey everyone, welcome to Bookends of Recovery. I'm Laura, and this is where recovery gets real and loved ones aren't left behind. If you are looking for tools and personal experiences and support without the sugarcoating, you are definitely in the right place. A little side note, I'm feeling a little bit jet lagged after a awesome vacation. Uh, and maybe fighting a cold. So if I sound like meh, it's not because I'm not into this. It's just I'm tired. That's what happens when you get older and travel. Anyway, um, yeah, so I'm going to share a little story with you, my bookenders. When I was new to emotional sobriety, I struggled with being a quote unquote fixer. So when you combine that with an ego that I also had, um, I, and I was only like, I don't know, 6 months into my emotional sobriety journey because let me take you back a little bit. For those of you that don't know, I had been clean for like, I don't know, 11, 12 years uh, before I even found out about emotional sobriety. And so I then found out about it and went to AA and Al Anon and blah, blah, blah. And so I struggled with ego because I was like, well, I've been sober and clean for just, all this time. So I just know all the things and everything I need to know. What do you know? And yeah, so my poor sponsees did not stand a chance. Like, they would share something vulnerable, and my first instinct was to just give them advice. Uh, I didn't know yet how to just sit back and hold space for them, just listen. And that was a skill that I had to learn. And it took longer than, I care to admit. And eventually I'm glad that I did. And it did happen before I moved on from um, Anon groups. And I'm also glad that I was able to go back to the people that I did sponsor and be like, hey man, I'm sorry I was such a jackass. I had a lot of ego problems. And they were like, yeah, no worries. But yeah, so if you're like that with your loved one who's struggling, yeah, don't worry. Uh, you're not alone. I did it with my husband too. And it's normal, because loving someone in addiction, it can feel like you're trying to like hug a cactus. Like you want to help, but every time you get close, you end up either hurting yourself or them or both of you. And the line between helping and, enabling, it can get like blurry. And sometimes, like, even with your best intentions, you accidentally push them further away. At least that's what happened with my husband and I. And side note, if you're like me and hate I used to hate the words enabling and codependent because I didn't understand their meaning. And so I took them as a sign of being weak because, I was like, I'm a strong, independent woman and I, you know, had my own house and was a single mom and don't tell me I'm, codependent. And I mean, if my counselor dared to mention the word, I'd be like, mm-mm. So, I ended up like swapping the words out just to get through some of the stuff that I was reading or, whatever. And so I would use words like, surviving or enmeshed, pretty much anything else that didn't make me feel weak because I just couldn't hear that word without cringing. That was my own mental block that I had to get past in order to move forward with healing. And it doesn't mean that we are broken or pathetic. It just means we've been thrown into a situation that we weren't equipped to handle. Like, no one handed me an instruction manual titled Living with an Active Addict and How to Protect Your Emotions on my wedding day. So what can you do? And how do you help someone you care about without becoming, either like a human doormat or a drill sergeant? So we're going to talk about some action steps that you can take. I think the first step, obviously, you have to start with a sense of empathy versus a sense of urgency, right? Because it's so tempting to just come out swinging with tough love. Obviously I did. You want to just be like, you need help. Like, I can't do this anymore. And these are valid feelings. And I know I've said this, dozens upon dozens of times. And rather than sounding like it's compassion, because that's a place where you're coming from, also probably frustration and maybe, some anger too. But it's also sounds like control. And when you come from, if you're saying that to someone and they hear it as control, that's going to make them be on the defensive and be less receptive to what you're saying. And so I was definitely a control freak, not just in the addiction area of my life, because my husband's addiction bled out to all areas of my life. Like somehow if I could manage, everything and everyone else, like somehow I could calm the chaos that I was feeling inside my head. But, spoiler alert, it didn't work. And so when I shifted things, and I looked at it from the lens of my own recovery and was like, yeah, if someone like talked to me this way during the height of my addiction, I would have told him to F off. Like it just wouldn't have worked. But when I shift to empathy and I watched how I talked to him, because I'm blunt, and even still, that's a trait that I still have to be very conscious about. It's just, I can go back to how I was raised, where I'm from. Everyone is just, you say what you say, and you mean what you say, and sometimes it comes off really rude. And that can be very bad, not energy, but like just a bad connotation of what you're trying to be gentle here, and now you're coming off like, hey, you gotta do this, it just comes off bad. So it sounds a lot softer to say, look, I love you, I'm worried about you, and if you ever want to talk about this, or if you ever need support, I'm here for you. And this way they know, okay, you are a safe space because it comes with like no judgment, no guilt, no shame, none of that fix it energy. It shows them that it's just coming from love, and it's that unconditional love, and you're their safe space to land, even when things are chaos. And again, I'm not saying that you don't have a right to be angry, you don't have a right to be frustrated, because of course things are going to be frustrating. But if you can look at them through the lens of empathy, and if they are making these strides, and going to meetings, and or they don't have to go to meetings, but support groups or whatever they are doing, platforms or online support, seeing a counselor or a life coach or an accountability partner, whatever their path is, they're making an effort to make that change. Um, and you're able to see, even if it's just this tiniest little glimpse, it's like, okay, I need to step back and let them do that. Because, there is a difference between supporting someone and trying to save them. Because you don't have to clean up their mess, right? You can be present for them and not be their caretaker, right? It's not your, not your monkeys and not your circus. Because saving them means that you're going to step in like with this superhero cape flapping in the wind, and then you lose yourself in the process, and that's not fair to you. And if you're doing things for them that they can, even if they're doing it badly, that they can do for themselves, that's an opportunity for you to take a step back and just let natural consequences happen. That's not you being mean to them. It's not cruel. It's not, you being like, ha ha, I'm not, taking care of this now, so now you have to see what happens. It's a moment of you being like clear-headed, clarity, and being like, you know what? I have been taking care of this for so long, and I'm now exhausted, and I can't do it for you. And now it's time for you to step up and take that responsibility. And some of the best lessons that my husband learned came from me not getting involved. Some even just from, like I said, it bled out into the family. And so, just as an example, I had a bad habit of stepping in, like, especially when it came to our kids. Like, I tried to save everyone's feelings like they were just some kind of delicate orchids, But once I stopped, the world didn't implode. In fact, things got better. Their relationships improved because their communication improved, because guess what? The middle woman, me, had been removed. And so it was like, why didn't I do this years ago? I could have saved myself so much, anxiety just from like, is there going to be this tension? Is there not going to be this tension? And I, like my, because they're stepkids, and so I mean my, obviously two of the kids are their dad died, but the relationship between them, it's like, wow, amazing. Anyway, and I get it. It's not always easy to step back, but it's emotionally freeing, and it's incredibly rewarding when you start seeing someone you love grow. Now, does it happen overnight? Absolutely not. You know, it takes time. And this is where boundaries come in. You know, they're our best friends, especially in the early stages of recovery and healing, because they help us stay grounded. And, and these boundaries have to be set with love and not stem from fear or control. Uh, I've talked about that many times where I did it wrong. Uh, but for example, you know, I love you, but I won't have substances in the house. That's a boundary, and it's a fair one. It's not mean. It protects your peace, and it helps them understand that their actions impact other people. It's not all about them, it affects you too. And, bonus tip, set your own boundaries when you're calm, right? Not during a meltdown or whatever. It's just, it's a good idea, or you're going to end up with the wild and crazy boundaries that I did. And then, of course, you want to make sure that you're reminding them of, I guess, humanity. Even if their behavior is challenging to you, which it's going to be at points, because addiction is messy. It just is. And it can turn someone who is just so kind and so loving into a version of themselves that you're not going to recognize. They lie, they disappear, they lash out, and it's okay for you to feel hurt, like I said, to feel angry. I just want you to not confuse their worst behavior with who they truly are on the inside. And I guess maybe I'm saying this because I just remember how I behaved and what I did, when I was at my worst, and I would have stepped over like my own mother, well, that's a bad example, but I would have stepped over like my own brother just to get a line. Like, I did not care. And I watched my husband's addiction turn both of us into people I didn't recognize. By the time my final disclosure happened, we were shells of people who we used to be, and it happened in it was fast. Like, pornography had been an issue on and off, for like I don't know, a couple of years, and then all of a sudden it just escalated so quickly. It was bananas. And we said some things that we wish we could take back, but we were both lost in our own traumas. We were in survival mode, and our communication was shit. So it was just so broken. And a quiet, I know this isn't who you really are, can go a lot further than you think. You're not excusing their behavior. You're reminding them that they're still worth saving. That does not mean that you have to tolerate any kind of behavior. That's what your boundaries are for. So I am not telling you to excuse anything. You do not have to tolerate any kind of unhealthy behavior. Please make sure you understand that. So that's why it's important for you to be consistent, even when you're exhausted. So if you tell them, I'm not going to give you money, then don't Venmo them at 2 a.m. because you're just tired of the phone calls or the texts or them guilting you or calling you names or whatever. Like, block them if you have to. And I get it. Like, you may get some pushback because I certainly did. But, there could be those passive aggressive texts or guilt tripping, silent treatments, slamming of cabinet doors or whatever, even outright yelling, But if they see that you are standing strong on your boundaries and you mean what you said, I'm not giving you money. Don't bother asking. It's not going to happen. And you don't give them money. They won't ask. Now, I will say you may run the risk of losing the relationship, whether it's for, a week, a month, 60 days, 90 days, a year. That may happen, and that's a risk that you may run. But sometimes we have to do things that are for our own well-being. And I know that sounds heartbreaking. And I wish I could say that every story ends in a fairy tale, but it's not your job to take care of other people. And I hope that you understand that. In the case of, my husband, when I told him things like, if I find that you had a setback, we're not going to share the same bed. You're going to have to sleep in the guest bed. And so, he had a setback. He didn't tell me, and he had to spend the night in the guest bed for 3 nights. He was pissed. And I was like, well, that's just the way it is. And so he gave me the silent treatment, and he was slamming cabinet doors. And then he would come in and be like, oh, my neck, oh. And I was like, well, I guess if you would have told me that you had a setback, you wouldn't have a sore neck. And that was the end of that. And he spent the next 2 nights in the thing, I didn't give in, like, too bad. And I know this sounds like you might feel like you're dealing with a toddler throwing a tantrum, and in some ways it kind of is. And I'm not calling the addict a toddler, don't get that wrong. I'm saying that the addict voice is, because it's saying, I want my way. I'm going to do whatever I need to do to get it, right? It's being loud. It's demanding. It's manipulating. And so that's what's turning the person that you love into behaving the way that they are. And so when you're consistent with your boundaries, you're saying to them, whether they can see it or not, is I love you, but I also love me too. And your love does not depend on their sobriety, but your support depends on your peace. And trust me, your nervous system will thank you because you're hypervigilance, your anxiety, your, if you've got depression, anything like that, once you put boundaries in place, it will change so much. And again, I'm not, if you're an addict and you're listening, I am not shitting on you. I am in recovery. I get it. It's just, as someone who loves someone also in recovery, we have to know that there are certain things that we cannot control, and we have to protect our own peace. We want to be that safe person for you. We want you to know that you can come to us, but there are some things that we cannot tolerate for our own peace. And that's when everyone involved needs to take care of themselves, right? Because supporting someone through addiction without tending to yourself, I mean, it's like trying to be a lifeguard without knowing how to swim. So everyone needs to have a support system. The loved one, you need to have a healing hive, whether that's a counselor, a support group, a trusted friend, even if it's just writing it all out, in your favorite quiet place. I used to love to go to a place by the water. I just would drive there and just journal it out, and then, take what I wrote and shred it into pieces, and there was a garbage can, and I would just throw it in that garbage can and drive away. But you don't have to, you don't have to martyr yourself to be helpful. When you're grounded and you are emotionally sober, you become that safe harbor that your loved one wants to come to, and they don't feel like they're being forced or that they're scared to confide in, because ultimately, like I said, there's not a fairy tale ending, but ultimately, if you're in a partnership and it's not, your daughter, your son, or whatever, if this is a relationship and you're trying to do this together, you want them to know that you are a safe space and that they can come to you and talk to you. That doesn't necessarily mean divulging every single, trigger, because sometimes knowledge is not always the best thing. You don't want to know every single trigger. That's what an accountability partner is for. But just knowing, hey, I had a stressful day and I'm just feeling a bit off today, and I just want you to know I'm not going to have a setback, but I'm feeling a bit down. You want your partner to be able to come to you and tell you these things. And I know it can feel like sometimes you're just shouting into the void, especially if your loved one is struggling. Remember, you're not alone. But when you're showing that empathy and your compassion, your loved one knows that, or your partner knows that. And for instance, like my husband, even when he was struggling and he was having setbacks, if I wasn't like judging him for it, if I wasn't like nagging him and I stayed steady, it was because I was staying steady and not just like, what the F, and why didn't you do this, and rather than doing that, rather than, like being, just trying to dictate everything he did, instead I was just like, do you have what's your plan for your setback plan? What are you going to do next? Stuff like that. Because I wanted to know, I was like, well, okay, you had a setback. Are you going to reach out to your accountability partner? Are you going to let your group know? Do you have anything scheduled with our counselor? That kind of stuff. And so he would let me know. And just knowing that I was involved, but not doing anything for him. I wouldn't schedule the session. I didn't do it. Then the next time we had a check-in conversation, I would ask, did you have your session? Oh, no, I haven't scheduled it yet. Okay, when are you? Okay, well, if you don't do this, then I'm going to have to set a boundary, because our agreement was I will stay with you as long as you're in a healthy recovery. So you can't force someone to change, but your steady, non-judgmental presence might be the anchor that they need and that they reach for when they're ready. And at the same time, you can create boundaries that keep you emotionally safe. So please keep your heart open, your boundaries clear. Make sure your humor is intact, because you're going to need it. I did. And remember the 3 C's of Al-Anon, even if you don't go to an Anon meeting. These are fantastic because they are true. And I didn't cause it. You didn't make your loved one an addict. Their choices and struggles are not your fault. This is super important, because in the very beginning, my husband would say things like, this is when things were really, really, really bad. He would say things like, well, I was really angry because this happened and you did this. And I was like, no, it's not my fault that, you didn't use some tools from your recovery and you had a setback. That's not my fault. You can't control it. No amount of begging, monitoring, manipulating will make them stop. And you can't cure it. Love alone won't heal addiction. You can support them, but you cannot fix them. So remember, I didn't cause it. I can't control it. I can't cure it. Helping someone heal shouldn't mean losing yourself in the process. So if you're struggling, check out the Loved Ones of Addicts section. It's a blog post, but you'll see the links to it on my website, bookendsofrecovery.com. And remember, if today's message resonated with you, you don't have to do this alone. Just reach out to someone. There are so many options out there. For deeper reflections, weekly support, and behind the scenes, healing insights, subscribe to my new Substack at bookendsofrecovery.substack.com. This is where I am sharing personal stuff, things that are not anywhere else. It's just my little cozy corner of the internet for bookenders who want to, you can grow at your own pace over there, but just learn nitty-gritty details that I don't share here or on my website, just exclusive to there. And if you're craving real-time connection with others, I'm thinking about doing a free online chat space over there. Just for bookenders. This will be for the addicts and also for the loved ones. And if that sounds like something you'd want to be a part of, head to my homepage and fill out the contact form just to let me know. You won't be put on a mailing list or anything. And let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. If I get enough people that are interested in, I will open up that chat. And the only thing is I do not want any bashing of anybody. It has to be a safe space for everyone. I don't want people saying, well, you got to leave him or whatever. That's not what this is about. And as always, you can find free recovery worksheets, blog posts, and practical tools over at bookendsofrecovery.com. And join me at Facebook at Bookends of Addiction Recovery, where we can keep this conversation going. As always, I am sending everyone positive vibes your way. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Laura. Have a beautiful day because you deserve it.